Hello, adventurer. It's good to see you. You have made it to the morning grind.
Welcome, welcome.
It's the live stream at the beginning of the Geekverse, where we talk about all types of topics in geekdom, gaming, and fantasy, with an emphasis on being constructive and creating the things that we want to exist in the world.
It's all on the grind, Sizemore. Can't be too fine, can't be too coarse.
That's exactly right. There are a lot of adventures to be had today. Dungeons to explore and monsters to slay, and who knows what a random encounter might send our way. That's why we have to prepare, so settle in now for the morning grind with your favorite beverage in hand.
Tea? Or maybe something a little stronger. I've got a few bottles of the old Wynyard left.
Whatever you want. Pull up a chair.
Dude.
If you're feeling fancy, how about a cappuccino? Or a frappuccino? Or how about an espresso?
Just tea, thank you.
Sounds good to me, Gandalf. Whatever you want. I'm just glad you're here.
Everyone is welcome. You can just watch if you want. You don't have to worship anything you don't want to worship.
Thank you, Mike. But be forewarned.
Sometimes we get really strange characters around here.
Wait, what's that you say? Why can't you come and be a part of the stream?
My wife would disown me.
Oh no, I bet she'll be fine with it. Come on in.
Am I scared for my safety? No.
What are we supposed to do?
Everybody do the secret handshake.
Secret cultist handshake.
Oh, now do wizards who love each other.
This, my friend, is a science.
I still don't have gills, but it's fine.
It's all on the grind, Sergeant. Can't be too fine, can't be too coarse.
Dude, this would be a sick place to bring the band.
Indeed it would be, Dave. It really would. I'm seeing more people coming in. Welcome. Glad to have you here. Oh, look, here's someone new.
Is this the cultist meetup?
Yes it is.
Come to hang out? Please accept me. I have nothing else.
Okay, we accept you. Everyone's welcome here.
Brought some snacks.
Well, that makes things even better.
You want some coffee? I don't drink coffee.
You sure? It's cultist coffee.
What makes it cultist coffee?
I'm a cultist and I'm drinking it.
Oh. Then I'll have some.
What exactly is going on here?
I'm seeing more people coming in. Welcome, welcome. It's so great to have you. Oh, and look, here comes another stranger.
Can we help you?
Yes, fellow cultists. I could really use some food.
Oh yeah? Welcome. We have donuts.
Oh, it's me. I'm glad I'm here. I'm sure you have a few questions for me, though.
What's your name? Who do you work for? What god do you worship?
Great questions, Rob.
I'm Steve King, and I worship Nyarlathotep.
No, not really. I'm just Heath, and I won't be worshiping anything this morning. But I will be your host. Welcome to the office. We're going to have a great time. I've got my coffee ready, because now it's time for the morning grind.
If you could become a fish, that would be amazing. Then I could command you with my mental fish powers.
Good morning, everyone. Oh, let me adjust the camera a little bit. Well, if I can. Good morning, everyone. It is great to have you. Oh, let me make sure that Oh, I'm syncing something. Let me pause. Syncing? Maybe that will, maybe if the stream is a little bit choppy, that will fix it. How is everybody today? I hope everybody's doing well. I did a bunch of manual labor yesterday, cutting more grass, trying to take care of the yard. I want to do this more today, but I've got a lot more work to do. I decided yesterday, I talked briefly about trying to paint up some of these Dragon Strike miniatures. And I decided, you know what? I think I will try to paint them up to a tabletop standard using the most minimum kind of standard that I can. So I talked about this man scorpion here. And so I just came in with this man scorpion. I gave him some silver on the blades that he's holding, some gold on the hilt of the sword, and then I painted his stinger because that's an important weapon right there. And then you know what? It really crisps it off once the base is painted, because like when this dragon right here, when the base is the same color as the miniature because it's been spray painted or primed or something like that, the miniature can look pretty reasonable, but you still know that, hey, that's a lot of spray paint and primer because the base is the same color. But you'd be amazed at just how much that makes that miniature look complete and finished once the base has become black. Looks like a perfectly reasonable tabletop quality miniature to me. So that one's done. And I decided, you know what? I could do the same thing with this fire elemental right here. I could sit here and try and paint orange and yellow and try to do all kinds of stuff with this guy. I mean, I could do that, but that was just the paint and primer and then a red wash. And then I just just painted the base black and then boom, that crisped it off. And I think that's perfectly reasonable tabletop fire elemental. Trying to get this box done. Did the same thing with this giant right here. I took a little bit more time. I took a little bit more time with this giant because his muscles are so prominent. I mean, they're kind of soft. They're kind of soft miniatures, but his muscles are so prominent. So I gave him a little bit of muscle highlighting. But hey, you know what? There we go. Painted black with a wash. There we go. And then over here, dark Death Knights. And these guys were painted gray. They were mostly gray. I mean, they were primed gray. And then I just put a few different colors on them. The handle of their scythe, the metal of the scythe, obviously some bone color on their face and some other places. And then I painted, looks like they're wearing like kilts or something like that. I don't really understand these miniatures because they're, like I said, they're a little bit soft. But then just did a dark wash on them, and they look like some dark, evil Death Knights done. So I like getting whole boxes of miniatures painted up to a tabletop standard. Now I forgot what I was trying to do. Actually, what I was trying to do, I was trying to do an experiment with these guys because this is the gray primer right here. So that's like a bugbear with the gray primer. So that's what he looked like. But what I meant to do was try to do a faster slap chop method. So, slap chop painting methods are black paint and primer or black primer underneath. And then you do a heavy dry brush of gray or like a medium gray. And then you do a lighter dry brush of white. But that was taking me longer than I wanted it to. It took a long time to prep the miniatures. So what I decided to try was, well, what if I just do a medium gray primer and then I come over here and I just do a white dry brush on top of them, like a kind of sloppy, but, quasi, well, I mean, I would say heavy, medium dry brush sort of thing on top of them. And so now I'm going to try to get all these other guys done with just one coat of speed paint or contrast paint. And I'm going to see how that looks. I'm going to see if that's faster. So basically I've got orcs over here, bugbears. I still got, and all the heroes, I got a bunch sitting over here. And I'm going to try to do them in just one coat of speed paint and see if how they look and see if that's a good way to just get the tabletop done. So after cutting grass yesterday, as I was chilling here, I was trying some painting. So Lynn says, good morning, Lynn. Who we got here? We got James here. Oh, Tomocrat says, morning storms have my Wi-Fi messed up, so it might be spotty. Oh, it does look like I cleared up over here. So, well, we're glad to have you while we can get you here, Tomocrat. James says, good morning. Not a bad solution. Looks good. Looks good. Thank you. James, Zero the Blade says, good morning, everyone. Lynn says, every time you're going for basic, you paint way better than I do at my best. Well, thank you. It's just not one of my talents. Well, thank you. This is, I am going for basic, and I'm trying, also, I would like to be able to, the nephews don't really want to sit and paint stuff. Of course, this is my box, so I sit here and paint these, but we're still trying to get them interested in something like Kings of War, and we need some painting ways to that they will actually do too, to get miniatures done. Tomocrat says, need to look for a good entry paint set. All right. So what else? Oh, let's go ahead and go do our sip this morning. And then we're going to go over here to GURP space. I noticed actually right before space combat, there is space travel. So we might look at space travel right before. And then the final chapter is they've got this abstract system for space combat. So we will look at both of those today. So everybody got your drink ready? Let's do a deep inhale, complete exhale, and then a sip of our favorite beverage here. So here we go. I've got Mountain Dew this morning. So here we go. Let's breathe in. Here we go. And sip. All right. Everybody sip. All right, let me bring up space travel over here. I don't know how long we're going to be going today, because we've got a fireworks show tonight for the 4th of July. Of course, the 4th of July is actually on Tuesday, but we've got a fireworks show to go to, and I'm thinking about going out there with my nephews. That's tonight, but that means I got to get stuff done today. Okay, so actually, so there are only 2 chapters. I believe there are 2 chapters left. Let's look at the table of contents, see what's in here. So we have done space systems. We're trying to look at how to do a UFO and how to do the tic tac. I'm thinking that what I'm going to do, I'll take those notes. I might try to clean them up a little bit, and then I might submit them over to the GURPS forum and say, hey, listen, we were trying to do the tic tac, and then we'll just see what they say and come up, and a UFO and see what they say. Maybe help clean it up, maybe clarify any misunderstandings or things like that. So, okay, so there are 2 chapters left. There's space travel right before basic space combat. So I don't know how long it'll take us to go through space travel, although it does have a lot of math in here. So it does talk more about the delta V and how to travel with reaction drives and things like that, which I think is interesting. So you know how much reaction mass you actually need. Once again, you kind of learn why why space travel or why star travel really isn't happening here on this planet. Because it's difficult. Space combat and then space combat. So I'm interested to see what type of rules they have for an abstract space combat system. But okay, let's just see what's going on with space travel. I forgot that was first when I was making up the thumbnail for today. Okay, combat. The space travel isn't too long. Well, that's several pages. Okay, space travel though. I was excited. I was watching more stuff about AI. I took a deep dive into AI about 3 months ago or something like that to figure out what it could do and figure out what its status is for making some of the things we want to make over here. And of course, this moves so fast. I was like, oh, this is not quite where I am. But while I was painting last night, I watched a whole bunch of videos on the state of stable diffusion, AI, image generation, and stuff like that, and what people are doing, especially with video. It's come along in 3 months. I'm excited to get back to it. It looks like we're finally getting to something that we might be able to make some cool stuff with. Okay, so no, MPS. Oh, did I say that was meters per second? I was wrong about that. Okay, I'm glad I looked at this. So MPS is miles per second. I might have sometimes been saying meters per second, but this is miles per second. MPS, when we see that, is miles per second. A parsec, this is a unit of interstellar measurement used in GURPS space. We talked about parsecs when we looked at GURPS space. 1 parsec is about 3.26 light years, or 206,000 AU. And the AU is the basic unit of interplanetary measurement equal to the average distance between the sun and the Earth. 1 AU is 93 million miles. Lynn says, most of the math you need is pretty simple unless you want realistic calculations as you accelerate up to a substantial fraction of the speed of light. Then you need hyperbolic trigonometry skills. Probably, I don't think we're going to that level. So we will see what happens. So we were talking about maneuver drives. That contrasts with star drive. So it's using the term star drive for something that's going to allow you to get faster than light. A maneuver drive to do less than the speed of light. So interplanetary voyages. The distance separating 2 planets in a star system may be as short as the distance between their distances from their star, or as long as the difference between their distances from their star, or as long as the sum of those distances, depending on their orbital positions. So true. That's probably simplified a lot in games, depending on the time. Now, I can hear Sable Phoenix already telling us that in order to have a complete game or whatever, in order to play a compelling game, you must keep accurate time records. So you would have to know what the time, at what time when you're dealing with these orbits, what are the position of these planets in order to determine, is it the shortest distance, the difference between their distances to the star, or as long as the sum of those distances, depending on their orbital positions. For an approximation, assume the distance between two worlds is equal to the average orbital radius, distance from its star, of the world furthest from that star. So as an approximation, assume the distance between two worlds is equal to the average orbital radius, that's the distance from its star, of the world furthest from that star. Okay, because it could be as short as the difference, or it could be, could be as short as the difference, or it could be as long as the sum of those two distances. So it's saying that if you're just trying to use something quick and easy for a board game or tabletop game, just say it's the distance the planet the furthest from the star is. Okay, I got you. I guess that keeps you from having to calculate all of the time. But the math should be 96M. It's cleaner than 93. Are you talking about astronomical unit up here? Most people don't bother with relativistic travel in games. Just engage the hyperdrive and don't worry about it. Yeah, you're right. Most people don't. Unless that's gonna, like, the only reason you would do that, or a main reason you would do that, if it's like some major feature of the game world, right? Okay, so the table below shows the orbital radii of planet and other significant bodies in our solar system. GURPS space can be used to determine these. GURPS space can be used to determine these statistics for other games, other systems, or the GM can just make up numbers using the solar system at our solar system as a guideline. The table shows orbital velocity, how fast the planet is moving in its orbit around the sun, in miles per second, and orbital period, the time it takes to orbit the sun, in Earth years. These two statistics are used when calculating interplanetary transfer orbits on page 38. Also shown are gravity G and escape velocity, two statistics important for determining if the spacecraft can take off or leave orbit. So here we go. Orbital radius, okay, 28G is the sun. Escape velocity 383, that's miles per second. Mercury, Venus, Earth. So Earth, orbital radius, of course, 1 AU. Orbital velocity 18.5 miles per second. Orbital period 1 year, 1G, 6.96 miles per second. The moon is only 1 mile per second of escape velocity. Ceres is the largest main belt asteroid. Pluto is the largest Kuiper belt object. This was written when they didn't classify Pluto as a planet, when it had been downgraded. Oort cloud statistics are for typical long period comets. Neptune is 30 AU. It's got an orbital velocity of 3.4 miles per second. 1.19 gravity, 1.65 year, 14.6 miles per second. So that's going to be our delta V that's in our rocket. Okay, so actually we're about to talk about that. Okay, Newtonian space flight and delta V. The top speed of a spacecraft that uses a reaction drive is really its delta V, the maximum change of velocity it can perform before running out of reaction mass, rocket fuel, etc. Now, we were using super science drives for our alien spacecrafts we were designing, so we weren't worried about reaction mass, but we do need to do that in other ones. The top speed of a spacecraft that uses a reaction drive is really its delta V, the maximum change of velocity it can perform before running out of reaction mass. Each acceleration or deceleration costs a fraction of its delta V. I do want to think about delta V when I'm trying to get the tic-tac out of light speed, because the tic-tac has to have some way to get itself out of light speed. I suppose if it put itself into like warp, it just would need some way to get itself out of warp, and all of a sudden that would be like one of those pseudo velocity engines or something like that, it would just come out. But if it's actually traveling fast, it needs to have some kind of way to apply delta V to itself in order to come out of light speed. The important spacecraft statistics are the acceleration of the reaction drives and the fuel tank's delta V reserve of reaction mass for these engines. So yes, we got not only the delta V reserve, but also the acceleration of the reaction drive engines. The GM will want to know how far the destination is in miles or AU, as well as an escape velocity in MPS and gravity in G of the origin and destination worlds. For example, the Princess of Helium is a passenger liner with a fusion torch drive. She's presently in Mars orbit. She has enough reaction mass in her fuel tanks to give the ship a delta V reserve of 55 miles per second, and her drive has 1G acceleration using her fusion torch engines. She's bound for Earth, which at this time we'll assume is about 1.5 AU from Mars. So this is going to be our example right here. Her drive has 1G acceleration. Okay. Getting into space. To take off from a planet and reach a low orbit around the body requires a delta V equal to 80% of the planet's escape velocity. That is 5.6 MPS. Okay, so you have to remember that. So this was escape velocity, but to low orbit, it's 80% of that. So this is an MPS, 5.6 MPS for Earth orbit. The spacecraft's acceleration must exceed gravity, 1G for Earth, or it must have wings in atmosphere or contragravity lifters. Okay, so that's why it's important. What is the spacecraft's acceleration? It needs to accelerate faster than this column right here, which is G. Because if you can't do that, you're going to be pulled back onto the planet. If a spacecraft is already in low orbit, okay, so if you have 1G, so for instance, this means that right here, her drive has the Princess of Helium, her drive has a 1G acceleration using fusion torch engines. That means she can't get off Jupiter. And she can't get off Neptune. Actually, that's interesting. She can get off, well, she can't get off the sun, obviously. But she could get off Mercury, off Venus, off Earth, off the moon, off Mars, off Ceres, the asteroid. Jupiter. Don't want to land on Jupiter because you cannot get off Jupiter with that engine. Saturn you can, Uranus you can, Neptune you cannot. Pluto, you can. If the spacecraft is already in low Earth orbit, uses delta V equal to about 30% of escape velocity to break orbit. This is about 2 meters per, no, not meters per second, miles per second, 2 miles per second to leave Earth. A winged or contragravity lifter equipped spacecraft with jet engines or reaction engines with ram rockets designed features in a very thin atmosphere needs less delta V. A winged or contragravity lift. Yeah, contragravity helps you get off planets because the contragravity was super science that helped you negate the effect of gravity on you. Spacecraft with jet engines or reaction engines with the ram rocket design feature in very thin or denser atmospheres needs less delta V to reach orbit or escape velocity. First, calculate airspeed using only the jet engine or the ram rockets, then divide miles per hour by 3,600, giving an airspeed in miles per second, then divide this from required delta V. If the escape velocity of other planets is known, which why would it not be if you're going through all of this and you're landing on planets? You would need to know the escape velocity of all your planets. Values can be determined from a planet's mass and radius relative to Earth. That actually might be what you were talking about, Lynn, because you did a lot of your stuff relative to Earth, right? Multiply the above velocities on the square root of ME divided by RE, where ME is the mass of Earth, mass in Earth masses, and RE is planetary radius in Earth radii. So it says, okay, so you're getting a ratio of Earth masses divided by Earth. The ratio is Earth masses to Earth radii. That gives you a number, a factor to multiply Earth's escape velocity by. Okay. Stars and escape velocity. The sun's escape velocity is 383 miles per second. Oh, right over here. Yes. For other stars and remnants such as neutron stars or black holes, multiply this velocity by the square root of ms rs, where ms is the mass in solar masses and rs is the radii in solar masses. Time required to lift off or break orbit is as follows. T is time in hours, delta V is the total delta V required, and A is the spacecraft's acceleration in G. So time required to break time to lift off or break orbit is equal to the delta V required times 0.045 divided by the acceleration of the craft. So, for example, this princess of helium is orbiting Mars and wants to break orbit. This requires 30% of Mars's escape velocity. The escape velocity of Mars is 3.1 miles per second, so she needs 0.93 MPS. She reduces the reaction mass in her tanks from 55 MPS to 54.03. So that would be something you've got to track. You need to be tracking your reaction mass. She could accelerate a full 1G, but since her passengers are from Mars, she decides to use less than that, a gentle 0.5G intermediate between Earth and Mars gravity. Accelerating at 0.5G, time required is 0.93. That is the delta V required times 0.045 divided by the speed the spacecraft's acceleration in G. That means it will take 0.084 hours or about 5 minutes to break orbit out of Mars. After a brief acceleration, she is free of Mars's gravity. Yeah, Lynn says, I can definitely see this. Lynn says it's just easier to work in relative units and then convert if you need hard numbers to a specific unit at some point. I can see how that would be easier. Yeah, because I mean, that's when I was looking at these numbers originally. Like, I can't pull off the top of my head. Like, give me the mass of a planet. Oh, I don't know. But it would be easier if it's a fraction of, okay, this is half as massive as Earth or something like that. Then I got it. Space travel with reaction drives. Orbital maneuvers or interplanetary travel once the spacecraft has escaped orbit require accelerating to the desired cruising velocity, coasting through space, then decelerating to the velocity required to orbit the destination. To plot a space journey for a reaction drive propelled spacecraft, decide how much of the spacecraft's delta V reserve will be used to accelerate. This delta V is the cruising velocity. Any amount minus the destination's own escape velocity must then be used to decelerate unless the spacecraft is to fly past or impact the destination. So, for instance, the Princess of Helium has just escaped Mars orbit and is boosting for Earth. She has a reserve of 54.07 miles per second of delta V left in her fuel tanks. The navigator decides to accelerate to a cruising velocity of 25 miles per second, and as the spacecraft nears Earth, another 25 miles per second minus 2.1 miles per second, Earth's to-orbit velocity, to decelerate. To orbit? Oh, so to orbit, that was our escape velocity. That's 30% of our escape velocity. Travel time. So that's what they're doing. They're going to be traveling at 25 miles per second. The full travel time breaks down into acceleration, cruise, and deceleration steps. Time to accelerate. First, determine time the spacecraft will spend accelerating to the desired cruising speed, delta V. This is the acceleration time. So T is equal to delta V times 0.0455 divided by A, where time is in hours, delta V is the total delta V required for the acceleration and deceleration, and A is the spacecraft's acceleration in G. That's very similar to what we were looking at before, right? There's an extra 5 on this one. The spacecraft will normally spend the same time decelerating. Example, since the Princess of Helium has an acceleration of 0.05 and wants to reach 25 miles per second, it spends 25 times 0.055 divided by 0.5 is equal to 3.2 hours accelerating to cruising speed near Mars. In the process, its occupants experience a gentle 1/2 of Earth's gravity acceleration. The ship will need to decelerate for the same amount of time at the other end of its trip. So that was, what did it say? 2.3 hours accelerating, so it will also spend 2.3 hours decelerating once it gets to Earth. Distance traveled during boost. An additional complication is that it's important during short voyages is the distance that was traveled during the acceleration and deceleration phases of the journey. This is CD equals T squared times A times 0.00048. T is the acceleration time in hours as calculated above. T is the accelerated time in hours as calculated above. A is the acceleration in G. CD is the distance traveled in AU during constant acceleration. It's usually simplest to assume the deceleration distance is the same, double the distance. So, for example, since the Princess of Helium spent 3.2 hours accelerating at 0.5 G, she traveled 3.2 squared times 0.5 times 0.00042 equals 0.0011 AU. We'll double that to include the deceleration burn for 0.0022 AU. And we did have our distance. What do we say our distance between these one? So we'll assume, okay, we're trying to travel 1.5 AU. So we've already, and 0.0022 is accounted for in the accelerations. I say acceleration and deceleration. If the distance traveled during the acceleration and deceleration phase is less than the total distance to the destination, the spacecraft will also spend time coasting. The time spent coasting in zero gravity, unless the spacecraft has spin gravity or artificial gravity generators, is calculated using the following formula. Time spent coasting in days is equal to TD times 0.076 divided by DV, where TD is the distance to the destination in astronomical units minus the distance traveled during the boost. DV is the cruising speed, and delta V in miles per second. And then that's, okay, time coasting is to give us time coasting in days. So, for instance, the distance from Mars to Earth is 0.5 AU. The Princess of Helium has already traveled 0.022 AU while boosting to and decelerating from its speed of 25 miles per second. It therefore spends the following time between boost periods coasting in zero gravity. So that's going to be 64.46 days coasting at that speed. So it's only 2.3 hours accelerating and decelerating, but that's a long time. So basically 64 and a half days that is going to be spent getting to and getting from Mars to Earth. I want to know how many people have actually used all of this kind of math in a game. A reaction drive vessel with enough delta V can accelerate to a midpoint, turn about, and then decelerate, thrusting all the way, much like a reactionless drive craft. Delta V, miles per second required, equals square root of distance in AU in G times 1.48. But that's going to use a lot of reaction mass to be continuously accelerating and decelerating. Special case ram scoop. Spacecraft using reaction drives whose reaction mass is being provided by ram scoops can travel as if they had a reactionless drive. However, they will generally first need to accelerate normally up to ram scoop velocity, which is 1,800 miles per second or more. It's like, so our Princess of Helium wouldn't even have that amount of delta V to get up to ram scoop velocity. Travel with reactionless drives. Spacecrafts and reactionless drives don't need to worry about reaction mass. They can continuously accelerate as long as the drives have power, although most are limited to velocities of a fraction of the speed of light, 186,000 miles per second. Okay, so we're going to talk about reactionless drives here in a second. So interplanetary transfer orbits. Planets and other celestial bodies don't stand still. It's possible to carefully time an interplanetary trip so the two planets' own orbits provide most of the necessary delta V. Exact travel times will vary depending on time of year. However, you can estimate the statistics of typical low-energy transfer orbit between two planets and other bodies, starting in orbit around one and ending in orbit around the other, using their orbital velocities and orbital periods. The solar system travel table on page 37 shows the values for planets in our own system. A transfer orbit involves maneuvers that require delta V equal to the difference in the two planets' orbital velocities. Use the first step of the reaction drive travel rules to find the time spent maneuvering. The majority of the trip is spent drifting in the low energy orbit. To find out how long this takes, add together the origin and destination orbital bodies periods in Earth year. Wait, so what are we doing here? I don't even understand what I'm reading here. A transfer orbit involves maneuvers that require a delta V equal to the difference in the two planets' orbital velocities. So that's why orbital velocity is important. So if I'm trying to get from Earth to Mars, then that's 3.4. The difference would be 3.4 miles per second. That would be the difference between those two. So if you're trying to do a low energy transfer at the right time, that would be 3.2. Use the first step of the reaction drive travel rules to find the time spent maneuvering. The majority of the trip is spent drifting in the low energy orbit. To find out how long this takes, add together the origin and destination bodies' orbital periods in Earth years. So we would add together 1 year plus Mars, so that would be 2.88 years. And divide by 4 to get travel time in years. So if we're adding together their orbital periods, that would be 2.88 and divide by 4 and then multiply it by 3. And so it's not an entire year. It's 0.27 of a year. 365. So that would mean that it would take 262 days. So actually, that spacecraft, the Princess of Helium, is going rather fast because it's going to take, like I thought, okay, that's 65 and a half days. But to do a low energy transfer orbit between the two, it would take 262 days to make that trip. So it's low energy, but you're spending a lot of time. Lynn says, I've never gotten that complicated with travel math in a game. I mean, I can do the calculations without a problem, but it adds nothing for the players. That's what you got to figure out. Is this actually, if you're doing all of this math here, to figure out what, is that actually adding anything to the game? They're trying to make Hohmann eclipse transfer orbits palatable to gamers. I'm not sure how successful that is. Yeah, I'm questionable too. It seems like we just need some way, we would abstract this even further and talk about the amount of reaction mass inside your spacecraft. And then if you had something that tells you how much it requires to get off of, how much reaction mass it requires to break orbit around a planet or to get into orbit around a planet, and then to get to and from from one planet to another in a certain amount of time. That's all you need. Maybe if you need some kind of, maybe if you pre-calculated that, you had some kind of table to look at, and that way you're just subtracting reaction mass from your drives. Okay, so travel with reactionless drives. Blast off. A spacecraft using a reactionless drive can fly into space if it is an acceleration greater if it has an acceleration greater or less than the planetary gravity, or is winged, or is using contragravity lifters. So 2 orbit is escape velocity times 0.08 minus airspeed times 2.8 divided by negative a minus g. Escape velocity t. Escape velocity minus airspeed times 2.8 divided by a minus g. Yeah, I can't imagine using this kind of math. So we got breaking orbit, though. Breaking orbit, travel time, long voyages. Once a spacecraft is broken orbit, the time in hours required to travel a distance measured in AU, including acceleration and deceleration, is shown below. Okay, so we do have a table here. So this is telling you if you're trying to get 1 AU. And here's your acceleration. So here's 1g of acceleration. Here's 2g. So 1g acceleration would be, us here on Earth. So travel times to go 1 AU, accelerating at 1g, that's 2.8 days. That sounds pretty good. Now, no, if you're not accelerating all that fast, 0.1 G, 9 days, but still that seems pretty good. Short journeys, C fractional velocity. Light sails and mag sails treat space sails as reactionless drives with no limit on the delta V they can spend, although their top speed is limited as noted in their descriptions. They get more acceleration the closer they are to a star. Multiply base thrust by 1 divided by d squared, where d is the average distance in AU from the star during the voyage. This is a somewhat unrealistic simplification of the actual sail flight. Most sail flight or magnetic sails will accelerate into low energy transfer orbits. Interstellar voyages. Then you get to star drives. Let's see. What do we need to know about this? Anything? We read a lot about different types of space drives when we were going through GURPS space. Hyper jump drive, warp drive. Space operations. It says there are some common activities such as entering or leaving the vessel, sensor scans, routine maintenance, and refueling. And what do they mean? So the most common way to board a spacecraft is via the vessel's airlock, but there are other methods. Airlock. An airlock allows people to enter or leave a ship in space without decompressing the vessel. The airlock is chamber with a heavy pressure tight door, valve, and another hatch at either end. Some superscience airlocks may use rigid airtight force fields instead of doors, although these are risky if the power fails. The outer door connects the chamber to the outside. The inner door leads from the chamber to the spacecraft's corridors or whatever hull section the airlock is attached to. Individual control panels may be left unlocked so anyone can access them. Otherwise, a visitor must insert an access key. So airlock capacity. The capacity of an airlock is the maximum number of human-sized individuals that can occupy it. The table below shows airlock capacity and area in hexes by spacecraft SM. Well, this is quite complicated for the amount of time it requires to enter by an airlock. So 5 to 7, our capacity is 1, our hexes is 1. Maybe 2 small grays could stand in there if necessary. Entering a spacecraft via airlock. How long that takes. Access the outer airlock's control panel or call inside, 2 seconds. I guess it matters if you're trying to get in really fast. Chambers can typically vary their pressure from 0 to 5 N atmospheres, where N is the hull DDR. Exiting an airlock. From inside the spacecraft, unlock and open the inner door 2 seconds, enter the airlock chamber 1 second, and so on. Docking between stations and hooking up your airlocks. A passenger tube is a flexible tube that connects the airlocks of 2 spacecraft in space that have compatible atmospheres. It holds pressure, allowing the occupants to travel between the ships without the need to cycle airlocks. It may be extended out to 30 yards, but it's about 2 meters in diameter and hooks to 2 yards in diameter and hooks to standard fittings around exterior airlocks. Rigging it takes about an hour in free fall, 30 minutes with multiple workers, and requires a mechanic vehicle type role. Emergency pressure doors, cargo bay doors, hangar bay doors. An entire bay, hangar bay, is designed to function as a giant airlock. It can be evacuated, storing the air in holding tanks before the doors are opened. It takes 1.5 minutes times pressure differential in atmosphere to change the pressure in a hangar bay. Thus, it usually takes about 1.5 minutes to go from one atmosphere to a vacuum or vice versa. The normal procedure is to evacuate the hangar bay and keep it evacuated during all launch and recovery operations. Hull breaches. Another way to get into or out of a spacecraft is through a big hole. The hull is breached if any non-core system is disabled or destroyed. Typical breach diameter in yards is shown on the table below. For disabled systems, roll for diameter. For destroyed systems, the breach is automatically the maximum hole possible size that can be rolled. Teleport projectors, cargo handling, computers and software, comms and sensors, passive sensors. Overloading life support. Repair and maintenance, consumables. Refueling, reaction drives consume reaction mass from fuel tanks to spacecraft up to their delta V. Fuel transfers, power plant refueling, gun and missile ammunition table. Guns and launchers require ammunition. The mass of the specified gun or missile shot is included in the weapon battery, but extra ammunition must be carried as cargo. The cost of ammunition is not included. The table shows the mass in tons per gunshot or missile. Super missiles. Drop capsules. These are designed to let their occupants enter atmosphere safely. They have small rocket engines clusters that provide limited maneuverability, but careful landing is a matter of good navigation. Deorbiting takes 2 to 3 rotations around a planet with an Earth-like atmosphere, more for a planet with a thinner atmosphere such as Mars. During this time, radio, radar, and all passive sensors will be blind due to plasma effects. For more information, see Ultra Tech. And then we get into space combat. So, all right, how do we fight in space? This seems like how much? Well, this is a pretty complicated system here. Well, let's see what it says in the round. This is almost like having GURPS mass combat right here. Basic space combat. Before combat can occur, opposing vessels must. Didn't we have when not to use these rules? So it does. Okay, when to not use these rules. These rules are intended to handle battles at great distances, often involving large crews. Don't use them where a standard 1-second combat turn and range calculation in yards are more appropriate. For example, if a spacecraft is strafing a party of adventurers on the ground, fighting an airplane, or boarded, feel free to switch to the standard GURPS basic set vehicle rules. Refer to the vehicle's short form statistic block and use weapons in ordinary combat. Okay, so this is like Starfleet combat, or I suppose Star Wars combat between capital ships. Spacecraft may contest the space around a planet, station, or jump point, or do battle in deep space. This combat system is intended to convey the feel of personal combat, but on a larger timescale and for vessels with multiple crews. It abstracts movement while focusing on crew tasks. Okay. That's good, because you want your players to be doing something during combat. Everybody doing something during combat. Before combat can occur, opposing vessels must have maneuvered into the same area of space, typically within a few hundred to several thousand miles of each other. Use the space travel and connection and detection rules in Chapter 3 and the combatants' relative courses and planned dispositions to determine if the encounter is likely. The GM may assume that Neither side has detected the other and may start the battle assuming detection has already occurred, or may start the battle assuming detection has already occurred. The GM must also decide on the encounter distance and turn length. Ambush and surprise. In some situations, one side may be able to ambush the other. Situations that might let a spacecraft get close enough to avoid detection include all of the one side spacecraft are using cloaking devices, a seemingly friendly spacecraft suddenly attacks, what sounds like Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan with the Reliant. A spacecraft appears unexpectedly from inside a space station, asteroid base, etc. A spacecraft was masked by a planet, moon, asteroid, or large space station. A GM may rule that an ambush may or does or does not take place on the basis of a role-played situation, a clever plan, or a quick contest of tactics and skills. Vessels on ambushed side will have surprised crews, see below, and the GM may also rule the encounter will take place at a shorter distance than usual. Select the encounter scale that suits the type of vessel involved. Close combat scale. Typical engagement range is 20 to 2,000 miles. This is suggested if most important vessels involved have delta V reserves below 5 miles per second, or if no weapons have ranges greater than short. What is short range? There must be another table that tells me that. I wonder if this is something, mass combat, the GURPS mass combat really didn't deal with spacecraft. It was using examples of like history and fantasy. I wonder if there's some way to use GURPS mass combat with spacecraft so you could be managing an interstellar organization. Typical engagement range is 200. Standard combat scale. So in standard combat, it says it shouldn't be used if the vessels have 50 G or more in acceleration as they'll race through the engagement area. Standard combat scale. Typical engagement range is 200 to 20,000 miles. This scale works best for vessels with 0.5 G to 500 G acceleration, or if no weapons have ranges greater than long. Distance combat scale. Typical engagement range is 2,000 to 200,000 miles. This scale is suggested if at least some of the spacecraft involved use weapons with extreme range or if fast drives, 50 G and up, are used. Space battles are fought in space combat turns whose length depends on the encounter scale and the spacecraft performance. The GM determines a turn length by selecting a reference spacecraft acceleration from the scale below. Ideally, all spacecrafts will fall into the same acceleration category. If not, the GM decides on the reference vessel, usually either the best performing craft or the one that's most typical of the encounter, or the most important craft, like the PC ship. So here is our ship's acceleration. At close scale, how much time are we taking? At standard scale and at distance scale. So this can be anywhere from 20 seconds per round to 10 minutes per round. Spacecraft with the reference acceleration or less. What is our reference acceleration? It's over here. Okay. So no. So if you are at standard scale and spacecraft with less than at 10 minutes per turn, spacecraft with less than the reference acceleration or less can't significantly alter course during the fight. Tactics will be dominated by gunnery and damage control, not maneuver. And then on the other hand, spacecraft with the reference acceleration are properly moving too fast for this encounter scale to be optimum, although you may use this scale if you wish. So here's our example. The smuggler Rose of Rigel with 2 Gs of acceleration is boosting away from the planet Moonjam. In orbit is the hostile patrol ship Shamblu, 4 G of acceleration. The GM decides it will be a standard scale encounter. Their drives both fall into the 0.5 plus G category. Oh, this one right here. this right here. So the GM cross-indexes that with the standard scale and determines the space combat will be a space combat turn will be 3 minutes long. Fast pass threshold table. Any spacecraft the GM decides has a velocity exceeding this threshold is making a fast pass. Didn't we talk about that with some type of other game where it's talking about that basically you orient yourself and then you're flying by each other and you basically have one pass at each other in order to try to make damage or try to damage each other? Any spacecraft the GM decides has a velocity exceeding this threshold is making a encounter velocity. Wait, am I supposed to be reading up here first? Encounter velocity and fast passes. Based on decisions made before the battles begins, the GM should have an idea of how fast the vessels are moving. I think I am supposed to read this first. Using the table below, determine whether any spacecraft are making a fast pass, moving so quickly they'll flash right through the encounter area in a turn or two. Examine the table below, comparing the turn length and encounter distance to find the threshold velocity. So if you're using 3-minute turns like we were using as an example, fast pass threshold 5.50, standard is 50 plus, distant is 50 plus. So this is standard. We were closing at standard distance. I think those are the distances. Close range, standard range, distance. So if there's a spacecraft traveling at 50 miles per second or more, it's going to be doing a fast pass. Any spacecraft the GM decides has a velocity exceeding this threshold is making a fast pass. Others are moving slowly enough to stay in the battle area. Otherwise, this is a fuzzy line. If a craft is within plus or minus 50%, the GM can opt to treat it as fast or not as desired. Example, continuing from the previous example, the GM decides the Rose of Rigel has just exceeded 7 miles per second. Moonjam's escape velocity, and that Shamblu is probably at an orbital velocity around 5 meters per second. Both of these fall under the 50 miles per second. Both of these craft fall under the 50 miles per second threshold for a standard scale encounter with 3-minute turns, so neither craft is making a fast pass. Pre-battle preparation. Current delta V. If a spacecraft has already used a reaction drive before the combat begins, note how much of its delta V reserve remains available. Formation. Spacecraft may be declared either to be in formation or docked before the engagement begins. See formations later. Crew and passenger locations. The GM should know where each PC and important NPC is in the spacecraft and have a general idea where everyone else is as well. Some tasks can be properly performed from certain systems. On SM5 or 6 spacecraft, which is what we're dealing with our Tic Tac and our UFO, characters may only occupy cargo, control, hangar, habitat, or passenger seat systems. On larger spacecraft, characters may be in any system save armor or non-empty fuel tanks. For simplicity, you can assume everyone is at their duty station and passengers are in habitats. Surprised crew. If a vessel's crew are surprised, see below, some crew may be in the wrong place, not at their action stations. They may have to take 1 or more space combat turns to reach their action station. See internal movement on page 63. There is a lot to GURPS space. An important part, GURPS spaceships here. I guess we should be expecting that. I think I am going to... people are here. Lynn says the space combat system from the old Babylon 5 RPG wasn't bad and could be played out on a hex map. Yeah, or we could do tiers of hex maps. Traveler's High Guard extends the rules from Book 2, mostly tweaks scale and time interval, and adds some heavy-duty weapons. There was also the old Starship combat rules for FAFSA Star Trek role-playing game. I think it made it playable in a way that won't lose or bore the players. You really have to play fast and loose with Newtonian physics and space combat systems. I agree. This is probably going too much. We'll see. I'm interested to know. I suppose we'll spend one more morning on it because I am interested to know like the command tasks leadership tasks, ship handling tasks, engineering tasks. I do like that it's task based, and I don't know these other systems like you guys do. And I do wish I had still remembered that game that was about starship combat, where everybody had a piece of paper that we were filling out and with damage on our ships and things like that. I wish I knew what that was. But I think for a role-playing game, at least it's doing this potentially right by saying, hey, we need to have specific tasks that all the players need to be doing. And do they actually do this well? And are they important? They all need to be important in the battle. You said this is for like crewed ships, so things like Star Trek combat or Star Wars capital ship combat. So actually a lot of this is the different actions that people take at their stations. So we'll see. We'll see. Traveling to and from different places required to, again, it's one of those things like, okay, so those different, all the stuff about maneuvering your starship and getting from one place to another, that's great. But once again, that's not something that I would use probably in game. If I'm trying to design some type of system or I'm trying to design some type of campaign, then what I would do is pre-compute a bunch of that and then put those in tables. And then that way, you know, the delta V reserve of your fuel tank, I would do that. You know, having some type of fuel for your spacecraft, assuming it's not some kind of reactionless drive. If it's some kind of reactionless drive, then you're not worried about that. But if you've got to have fuel tanks and you've got to refuel your ship, then how much fuel you've got, okay, that's an important part or a potentially important part of important resource to management. And I would probably say that it would be in most games. So then we would just know, okay, you can get there in this amount of time for this amount. This amount of time for this amount. Make time an important factor again, but not try to compute all of that every time you're going someplace. You would just need some basic tables. Like here's the standard voyage. The standard voyage between X and Y is done with X amount of fuel. Starfleet battles, warp wars. I don't know. And I wish I did. I don't remember it being branded. I think I would remember if it were specifically Star Trek, and I don't remember looking at Star Trek ships on the pages. So I don't think it's warp wars. I'll look that one up. Warp War is a science fiction board game published in 1977. I bet it wasn't that old. Yeah, I don't think it was that old. Who knows? All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here today because I've got some other things I've got to do, a lot of things I've got to do today before I potentially go and see fireworks tonight with the nephews. So everybody, thank you so much for hanging out with me. I hope everybody goes and be productive, be creative, and grind on. I will see you in the morning.